If you clicked on this video, you've most likely played your fair share of games. And there's also a chance that you played a number of games from a specific series. Perhaps there's those few series you played through that stuck with you. Some way, somehow, it managed to draw you in and captivate you. The Xeno series, for me, is exactly that. My starting point for this series of generally loosely connected games was Xenoblade X for the Nintendo Wii U. My mother got it for me in the summer of 2016, roughly 6 months after its release. Prior to having the game, I was paying very close attention to it leading up to its launch. The open world, the soundtrack, the scales, the gameplay, the character creation, it all drew me in. So you can best believe I was excited to finally play the game, and when I did, I was instantly glued to the screen. It was almost everything I could ask for in the game, and it still is, mind you. Although the aspects I was looking forward to shattered my expectations. The only part of the game I found slightly underwhelming was the story, and while the soundtrack was criticized upon the game's release,
the overall sense of place is weakened further by a bad soundtrack that tries to be upbeat, but sounds like noise instead.
What do you mean by that?
I absolutely loved it. It's in my top 3 favorite video game soundtracks of all time, if not my favorite video game soundtrack of all time. The soundtrack was composed by renowned composer Hiroyuki Sawano, the genius behind soundtracks for anime like Attack on Titan, Guilty Crown, Blue Exorcist, Gundam Unicorn, the list goes on. How about we sit back and take a listen to this wonderful soundtrack, shall we? Now, did that sound like just noise to you? Shit, it didn't to me.
Sounds like noise instead.
Get back the Bro, chill. Get out.
This game not only made me appreciate soundtracks in video games, but entertainment as a whole. And it also made me a big fan of Sawano and his amazing body of work. Xenoblade X's combat system was unlike anything I've experienced up until that point. The ability to choose a path and subsequently which class you would like to play was one of the many things in the game that gave you that sense of immersion. And don't get me started on being able to develop weapons, augments, ground gear, scale gear. The game was simply overwhelming, and it's not a bad thing. And last but definitely not least, the open world. My experience with open world games was little to none before playing this game back in 2016, and Mira, the planet you're on, amazed me in every possible way. The world was vast and detailed with sprawling wildlife and dynamic weather, which resulted in beautiful scenery. Coupled with the epic soundtrack and the extremely satisfying and empowering scale gameplay made for an absolutely memorable experience. Something I will never forget. Coming back to this game for the purpose of this video was great. The gameplay you've been seeing in this video is a brand new character I made for the sake of this video, and a character I made back in 2018. Just ignore the trash ass cosplay, please. Throughout the entirety of that summer break, I was playing this game. I was simply encapsulated. The developers nailed something, and as for what they did, I'll touch on that later. Xenoblade X was an outstanding first impression of the series. It will be 2 years until I have finally visited this series again. I picked up Xenosaga Episode 1 from a local video game store in 2018. Hearing about how the trilogy was well received and how it was created by the same people who made Xenoblade, I decided to finally give it a shot. The game started off pretty slow. There were a decent amount of cutscenes that were used to set the tone of the ship you're on, the Woglinde, along with some tutorials. Right when I felt like the introduction was beginning to overstay its welcome, the game simply decided to turn it up a notch. And boy, let me tell you, it blew my mind away. It felt like I was watching some Cowboy Bebop on steroids or something, bro. Like, it was crazy. But in all seriousness, let me explain. Coming from playing the Metal Gear franchise and being a frequent anime watcher, long cutscenes in games are no problem for me. Of course, the story has to be solid and well written for me to be engaged, but personally, I'm fine with longer cutscenes. Xenosaga Episode 1's story managed to be so engaging that there were times where I looked forward to the cutscenes over the gameplay. And that's not me slighting the gameplay at all. This game's plot was just simply amazing. The story touches on a lot of mature themes and topics, such as religion, politics, philosophy, spirituality, humanism, etc. The characters in this game are really well written, with a lot of them giving that impression that there's more to them than meets the eye. By the end of the game, I was deeply attached to these characters. Even the villains, as fucked up as they were. As for the gameplay, I enjoyed it, not as much as X, but I still liked it. It's your typical JRPG at first glance, but upon further inspection, it brings a couple of nice things to the table, those being the boost system, techniques, and mechs, all of which brought a nice pace and flow to the combat. Combat aside, the soundtrack was beautiful. The soundtrack was by legendary composer Yasunori Masuda. While all of the areas in the game lacked music, except for the last two areas of the game, the music for the cutscenes were absolutely amazing. And while some disliked the fact that there wasn't any music throughout most areas in the game, I personally thought it added a unique atmosphere. Overall, I absolutely loved this game and was fully hooked to the story. I immediately went on to play Episode 2. I'll say right off the bat, Xenosaga Episode 2 is my least favorite in the trilogy and in the whole series, mostly due to the overly complicated and repetitive combat system. However, even with all of its problems, I have no regret saying that Xenosaga Episode 2 adds a lot of wonderful things to the trilogy, continuing where Episode 1 left off. The story and the writing was still top notch, and the opening cutscene was one of the most memorable things I ever experienced from a video game. And while the combat system was scuffed, I felt that the mechs, in my opinion, were implemented much more seamlessly than in the first game. The soundtrack was amazing like the first game, this time being composed by Yuki Kajiura. To be honest, I actually like this game's soundtrack more than Episode 1's. The music left a much greater impression on me. In summary, even with all of its missteps, I can give credit where credit is due and respect what the developers did. I still walked away loving and appreciating the game and what it brings to the table, even now. As for Episode 3, oh man, where do I even begin? I heard a lot of great things before playing this game. Almost everyone I came across said that it's the best entry in the trilogy and how the game was a perfect wrap up to this three-part story. When I beat Episode 3 back in 2019, I 100% understood where all the praise was coming from. It's my favorite game in the trilogy, the top 3 favorite in the series, and it's just an RPG video game masterpiece. The gameplay in this one, in my opinion, was at its peak. They moved on from the combat in Episode 2 and made things a little more streamlined, but didn't sacrifice what made the Xenosaga Episode 1 combat so good. The boost system remains, and the technique attacks have their own separate menu. And don't get me started with the mechs, man. Oh my goodness, it was absolute perfection, man. Like, holy shit. The mech battle system was very fluid and satisfying, while at its core being the same turn-based system as the ground combat. There were also these things called anima attacks, which allowed the mechs to do flashy, powerful moves. These were a pleasure to just witness and see on the screen. Like, you know, I love flashy shit, man. It's amazing, bro. And you already know this soundtrack was a banger, man. I mean, what do you expect? So far, this series hasn't had a shitty ass soundtrack at all. The impactful music, along with the well-directed cutscenes, led to some extremely memorable moments for me. Especially that whole ending sequence, like, that was insane. Without going to any spoilers, Monolith Soft managed to wrap the game's story up in an extremely satisfying way. Amazing considering that the Xenosaga series is meant to be 6 parts. Overall, the Xenosaga trilogy was one of those experiences that I wish I could have my memory erased to experience it blind again. It immediately became my favorite video game trilogy of all time. Right after completing Episode 3, I went on to play the game that started this ambitious series, Xenogears. Xenogears instantly grabbed me with its intro. It was cinematic, ominous, well animated, and set the tone for the rest of the story. The animated cutscenes really helped make this game for me. It added a certain charm and depth to the experience and was well animated for its time. They even came with voice acting, and it wasn't that bad. With this being the origin point for the Xeno series, a lot of elements and themes that are in the previous games I played were present here. The game's story is deep as hell. Elements of reincarnation, religion, politics are present. Pretty much the same stuff as Xenosaga. Without sounding like a broken record, I really love this game's soundtrack a lot. It's right behind Xenoblade Chronicles X and Xenosaga Episode 3 for me. Whenever you get the chance, take the time to listen to this game's OST. It really knows how to convey emotion. Yasunori Mitsuda went the fuck off, man. Quite simply, like, for real. The turn-based hand-to-hand combat was sick as well. The different combos you could do in the game, along with a traditional magic system. It wasn't without some faults, but overall I loved it. And of course, with this being a Xeno game, it has mechs. The mech combat system was the same as the ground combat with the combos and all. During my original playthrough, the game whooped my ass. Yes, Xenogears does in fact have a fair challenge, but there were a lot of times where I was underleveled. I used to have a bad habit of skipping a lot of random battles in JRPGs. Still kinda do, to be honest. But anyways, overall my experience with Xenogears was very memorable. Its story is a goddamn masterpiece, and its engaging character arcs made for one hell of a game. Months after beating Xenogears, Nintendo revealed that the first Xenoblade Chronicles game was getting a re-release titled as Xenoblade Chronicles X. Oh no! Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. This remaster would come with updated graphics, a remastered soundtrack, and a playable epilogue to the original story known as Future Connected. You already know I was all over that. I was already contemplating if I wanted to go back and play the 3DS version or just play Chronicles 2, so that announcement came at the perfect time. In May of 2020, the game finally came out, and I made sure to get the deluxe edition. It was nice going back to the action art-based combat I experienced in X. It felt right at home. I remember exploring water plains and hearing the music for the first time, an experience that gave me sensory overload in a great non-stressful way. The narrative for this game was fulfilling, and I really felt for the main character, Shulk, throughout the game. And the amazing voice acting really helped tie it all together. You could really feel the intense emotions in those cutscenes. After playing through Chronicles 1, I naturally went on to finally purchase Chronicles 2, and I also went along and bought its deluxe edition as well. You know I had to do it to him, man. Like, you know I had to. The world of Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and its characters are something I hold very dear. I feel the beautiful visuals definitely have a part in that, but man, the writing for this game hit home for me. The story was extremely satisfying as it unfolded, and the characters were very likable. I was invested in the relations Rex built throughout the game, and I felt for Jin as the story progressed thanks to the well-written and voice-acted cutscenes. For the most part. Oh, and no surprise, the soundtrack is amazing. What a fucking shocker. The combat system is my favorite in the whole Xeno series. It's an evolved version of the previous Chronicle games, and is more fast-paced, has a nice learning curve, and is extremely rewarding. And somehow, they managed to take the combat even further with the DLC. The Vanguard system added a wonderful dynamic to the encounters. It's my favorite combat system in the series, hands down. And on the topic of the DLC, it offered great context to the main game story and helped flesh out characters like Jin, Adam, Mithra, and Bridget. It really enhanced the overall experience. By the way, fuck the gacha. To conclude this video and not overstay my welcome, the Xeno series from the jump managed to have me hooked on its profound, satisfying, and addicting journey. Something Monolith Soft understands really well is balance. Even going back to Xenogears, when Tetsuya Takahashi and his team were with Square, they had it nailed. The story, the soundtrack, the characters, the world, the gameplay, the Xeno games all managed to strike a proper balance with me. These games are their own intricate, epic experiences, something I feel is kind of taken for granted in gaming nowadays. This series has literally helped shift my perspective on not only video games, but life with its relatable and thought-provoking themes. If you made it to the end of this video, I highly recommend you give these games a shot. Thanks for watching, and of course, thank you, Monolith Soft, for taking your time to craft this series. I can't wait to play Xenoblade Chronicles 3.